This seat is mine. Find somewhere else. Ma'am, step away from first class, or security will remove you. Dad, ground the flight. Those 4 sentences, spoken in that order, inside 11 minutes, on a Tuesday morning out of Atlanta, would end 3 careers and expose a truth that airline executives had spent years pretending not to see. But to understand how it started, you have to go back to the beginning of that morning, before anyone raised their voice, before anyone reached for a phone, before a single person on that aircraft understood exactly who they were dealing with. Amara Bankole stood in the aisle beside seat 2A, with her phone open in one hand. Her boarding pass filled the screen. Bright, current, unmistakable. Meridian Airways, Flight 717, first class, seat 2A, her name spelled correctly, her photo ID matching. It was, by every measure that mattered, proof. Proof that Dale Whitcomb had decided not to look at. He sat by the window as if the entire conversation happening 6 inches from his shoulder concerned someone else entirely. A slate-gray laptop rested open on his tray table. His navy suit jacket had been draped across the empty seat beside him, her seat like a flag planted on territory he intended to keep. A glass of sparkling water sat near his elbow, untouched, more prop than refreshment. He had arranged the whole space around himself with the quiet confidence of a man who believed that possession, held long enough, eventually became law. Amara kept her shoulders level, kept her voice even. But underneath her ribs, something had drawn tight and was not loosening. She could feel the cabin watching. Newspapers had lowered. A tablet had frozen mid-scroll in row 3. Somewhere near the aisle, a phone had turned itself toward them with the studied carelessness of someone pretending they weren't filming. "What safety rule have I violated?" she asked. The man standing between them didn't answer right away. Grady Poole was 46, clean-shaven, built like someone who'd once played linebacker and never quite lost the posture. A supervisor pin sat centered above his breast pocket, perfectly straight, like it had been adjusted in a mirror that morning. His uniform suggested order. His eyes suggested he had already made up his mind and was only waiting for the paperwork to catch up. "You are refusing a reasonable crew instruction," Grady said. "We asked you to move to another seat." "You asked me to give up the seat printed on my ticket," Amara said, "because he prefers it." Dale exhaled through his nose, without looking up from his screen. This has gone on long enough. Then finally, he looked at her. Not at the phone in her hand. Not at the boarding pass glowing on the screen. At her. His eyes moved across her cream blazer, her leather tote, her natural curls, her brown skin. Cataloging her the way a man reviews an application he has already decided to reject, just checking which box to write the rejection on. "I've flown this route for 6 years," he said, like that settled something. "People don't just materialize in 2A because an app tells them to." 11 minutes earlier, when Amara had first reached the row, she had given him every chance to correct himself quietly, privately, with no one else listening. "Excuse me, sir. My boarding pass says 2A. He hadn't checked his own ticket. He hadn't even glanced at hers. "I think you've misread the cabin," he'd said, mild as milk, the kind of sentence built to be denied later if anyone challenged it. Premium economy's back that way. Amara had heard versions of that sentence before. In hotel lobbies, in investor lounges, in rooms where she was the only person who'd built anything, and somehow the last person anyone believed had. "Are you sure this seat is yours? Are you waiting for someone?" "Which company are you with, dear?" The words changed. The question underneath never did. "How did someone like you end up here?" The flight attendant, Renee Castellano, had arrived soon after, drawn by the blocked aisle, by Dale's visible irritation, by the low murmur spreading backward through the cabin. She hadn't asked which passenger held the confirmed seat. She'd turned straight to Amara. "Ma'am, can you show me how you obtained this reservation? Not may I see your boarding pass. Not which seat were you assigned. How did you obtain it?" like the burden of proof had already been assigned before anyone opened a screen. Amara had shown her everything: the digital pass, her driver's license, the live reservation inside the Meridian app, complete with a confirmation code and a purchase date 4 weeks old. Renee had checked the name twice, then asked, almost gently, whether Amara had received a complimentary upgrade. Dale had been asked to show nothing, and even after the system quietly confirmed, on Renee's own tablet, that seat 2A belonged to Amara Bankole, and no one else. Renee had turned and apologized to Dale for the inconvenience, then offered Amara seat 4B instead, as if the correction and the punishment could arrive in the same breath and cancel each other out. Dale had smiled without quite smiling. Now Grady had reduced 11 minutes of that history into 4 words: uncooperative passenger. "Ms. Bankole," he said, voice dropping lower, like volume alone could make a threat sound reasonable. "I am giving you a final opportunity to resolve this without further action." Amara looked past him, toward Renee. The flight attendant's mouth had pressed into a tight line. She wasn't meeting Amara's eyes, but her hand was gripping the tablet hard enough that her knuckles had gone pale. She knew. She had known for several minutes exactly what the system said. That knowledge had not changed who she chose to pressure. Is Mr. Whitcomb being given a final opportunity to return to his assigned seat? Amara asked. Grady's jaw flexed. "This conversation is about your compliance." "That's an answer," Amara said quietly. Dale snapped his laptop shut. "She's holding up an entire aircraft to make a point." From across the aisle, a woman in her 60s looked up from her book. "She has the ticket," she said, not loudly, but clearly enough to land. Grady didn't acknowledge her. He kept his eyes on Amara. "If you continue to refuse, I will call security and have you removed from this aircraft." There it was, the ending they'd been building toward the entire time. One woman escorted off in front of 180 strangers. One frequent flyer settled comfortably back into his window seat. One incident report, written afterward in language clean enough to hide everything that had made it ugly. Amara felt the anger rise, fast and hot, straight up through her chest. She let it sit there for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough to feel it fully. Not long enough to let it choose her next words for her. "Before you call security," she said, voice level, almost gentle, "write down, in your own handwriting, exactly why the passenger holding the valid ticket is the one being removed, and not the man currently sitting in her seat." Grady stared at her. For the first time since this began, something cracked in the practiced calm on his face. Around them, more phones lifted. More screens turned toward the row. No one in that cabin yet understood why the name Amara Bankole would matter to Meridian Airways' executive team by the end of the week. No one understood that removing her from Flight 714 was about to cost more people their jobs than she had fingers on one hand. To understand how far this was going to go, you have to go back further, 40 minutes further, to a quiet gate at Hartsfield-Jackson, before any of this had started. 40 minutes earlier, Amara Bankole had arrived at gate C-22, before the morning rush had fully hardened into noise. She found a seat near the window, set her coffee down beside her laptop, and opened the latest build of Hallowave, the passenger accessibility platform she had spent 3 years building from a dorm room idea into something airlines were now paying real money to license. On screen, a simulated boarding alert, color-coded, paired with a vibration cue for connected devices, simple to look at, brutal to build. It had taken 3 years to make it work flawlessly across crowded, overloaded airport networks, the kind that dropped half their signal the moment 400 phones tried to connect at once. Red for gate closures, amber for boarding changes, blue for service updates. The system existed for travelers who couldn't rely on overhead audio, for people with hearing loss, for parents chasing toddlers, for anyone whose attention the world had never bothered to make room for. But underneath the technical spec was a belief Amara had built the whole company around. Access should never depend on knowing how to ask the right way, to the right person, in the right tone. Hallowave had started 7 years earlier as a university project. 1 borrowed lab room, 2 second-hand monitors, a prototype that crashed the instant more than a dozen people connected to it at once. Her father, Amara Bankole, had offered to fund the whole thing before she'd even filed the paperwork. He wanted to spare her the specific humiliations he remembered, from building Bankole Reyes Capital, from nothing, the years before anyone believed a black man from Southeast D.C. could run a fund worth billions. Amara had said no. She knew exactly what investors would whisper the moment his name appeared anywhere near her company's story. Family experiment. Rich man's daughter playing founder. Proof she'd never carried real risk like everyone else in the room. So she'd taken the smallest office she could find, accepted a state innovation grant, consulted nights for 2 regional hospitals to make payroll, and learned how to keep a company alive a full year before she learned how to sleep more than 5 hours a night. Solomon remained the person she called when a contract felt wrong, or when a board member smiled a little too easily. Nothing more official than that. He had never once put his name on her cap table. Her phone buzzed at 6:58 a.m. Her product lead, Owen Castillo, filled the screen. "The San Francisco deck's ready," Owen said. "We moved the accessibility metrics to slide 6. Move them back to slide 2." Amara said. "They need to understand the problem before they fall in love with the technology." Her ops director, Priya Anand, leaned toward the mic. "One of the Skyline Capital. People asked if we should mention your father in the opening." Amara's fingers stopped over the keyboard. She'd expected the question. She still hated hearing it out loud. "Don't sell them my last name," she said. "Sell them what the product actually does." Owen nodded. Priya didn't smile, which Amara appreciated, because it wasn't false modesty. It was survival. A famous name could open a door. It could also erase every hour of work it took you to walk through it. After the call, Amara closed her laptop and joined the priority boarding line. A gate agent named Denise Farrow glanced at her, then up at the sign overhead. "General boarding hasn't started yet," Denise said. "I'm in the first-class group," Amara said, holding up her phone. Denise looked at the screen. Didn't scan it. "You sure this is your line?" Behind Amara, a white man in a tailored charcoal suit shifted his weight, leather briefcase in hand. Denise gave him a warm, automatic smile. Didn't ask which group he was in. Amara felt the old, familiar pressure settle behind her sternum. Not surprise. Recognition. She held her phone under the scanner herself. It flashed green. A soft chime confirmed the reservation. Denise looked at the display. "Oh, system's right," she said. No apology followed it. Amara stepped aside, opened her notes app, and logged the time, the gate number, Denise's name. She'd started keeping records like this 2 years earlier, after an investor had once suggested, carefully, politely, that she might be exaggerating a hotel incident. Memory could be questioned. A timestamp couldn't. Near the jet bridge, a Meridian Airways banner showed smiling, sunlit travelers under the words, "Every passenger, equal respect." Amara studied it for exactly 2 seconds, then kept walking. Just before switching her phone to airplane mode, a text from Solomon appeared. "Let your work introduce you before your name does." She smiled and locked the screen. She had no idea those words were about to become the hardest test of her entire year. Dale Whitcomb had received his seat change notification at 9:41 the night before. Meridian had swapped the aircraft on his route for a smaller model, and his reservation had shifted from 2A to 4C. The app had spelled it out in plain, unambiguous language and asked him to confirm. Dale read it, frowned, tapped acknowledge, closed the screen. For 6 years he'd flown this exact route enough times to believe the rules bent quietly around men like him. Gate agents remembered his name. Flight attendants remembered his order, Black coffee, no sugar, extra ice on the second round. More than once, another passenger had been asked, gently, to move so he could keep his preferred window seat. By morning, habit had calcified into expectation. He boarded with the first wave, walked straight past row 4 and settled into 2A before anyone could think to stop him. His jacket went across the seat beside him. His laptop opened. The space became his simply because he behaved as if it already were, and nobody in earshot had yet decided to test that assumption. When Amara stopped beside the row, Dale ran a quick, silent calculation. Younger than him by at least 15 years. Dressed well, but without the particular signals, watch, bag, shoes, that he'd trained himself to recognize as belonging. Traveling alone. Her skin, her curls, completed a story in his head he never bothered to question. In his mind, she was far more likely to have been upgraded than to have simply bought the seat herself. Far more likely to back down than to push. "Excuse me, sir," Amara said. "My boarding pass says 2A. She turned her phone so he could see it clearly. He didn't lean toward it at all. This, a last-minute upgrade. The question sounded almost bored. His eyes stayed on her face, waiting for the flicker of embarrassment he expected to find there. "No, I booked and paid for a first-class window seat 4 weeks ago. After the aircraft change, Meridian confirmed me in 2A. A thin smile touched one corner of his mouth. Airlines hand out promotional upgrades to fill these seats all the time now. Amara felt the insult land without a single word of being technically said out loud. He hadn't called her unable to afford the seat. He'd simply dismissed the most obvious explanation without even glancing at the evidence in her hand. "Please just check your current boarding pass," she said. "That'll settle it in 10 seconds. Dale tapped one finger against his laptop, not looking up. "That's the crew's job." He turned back to his screen, dismissing her completely, while leaving her standing exactly where he wanted her. Blocking the aisle, holding up the line, becoming, in front of 180 strangers. The problem. Passengers began collecting behind her. Dale glanced toward the growing line, as if she had personally conjured it. "You're holding people up," he said. Renee Castellano arrived from the forward galley, already calculating a delay in her head. "What seems to be the issue?" Dale answered first, smooth as glass. "There's some kind of duplicate assignment. I have 2A. Renee recognized him instantly. Mr. Whitcomb. Warm, familiar. Then she turned to Amara, and the warmth simply evaporated from her voice. "May I see your boarding pass?" Amara handed over her phone. Renee checked the seat number, then asked for ID. Amara provided it. Renee compared the name on the license to the name on the reservation, then asked for the confirmation code. Amara gave her that too. "Are you a Meridian member?" Renee asked. Amara pulled up her account. "When did you purchase the ticket?" 4 weeks ago. Every answer produced a new question. Every piece of proof seemed to manufacture a fresh reason for doubt. Dale stayed seated through all of it, unbothered, unquestioned. When Renee finally glanced his way, he lifted his chin slightly and said, "Everyone up here knows me." From seat 3D, across the aisle, a woman lowered the medical journal she'd been reading. Dr. Whitney Sorrell's eyes moved from Amara's open phone to Dale's still-closed laptop. "You've checked her 4 times, she said. "Why haven't you checked him even once?" Renee's cheeks tightened. "Please, let us handle this professionally." "Professional would mean checking both tickets," Whitney said. Dale shifted in his seat, irritation flickering across his face. Public scrutiny had not been part of the morning he'd planned. He reached for his phone and pulled up a screenshot instead of the live app. An image showing his name in seat 2A, frozen in time from the night before. Renee's posture eased instantly. There, that should settle it. Amara stepped closer, not toward Dale, toward the screen itself. The screenshot had been cropped along the top edge, but a thin sliver of a notification banner was still visible above the boarding pass. 3 words, barely legible, but legible enough Seat assignment updated. Amara looked up at Dale. He locked the phone a half-second too fast. Small movement. It answered everything anyone needed to know. He'd read the change. He'd saved the old screenshot on purpose. He'd boarded early, expecting whoever came after him to be the one who moved. This wasn't confusion. This was a decision, made the night before, and executed with total confidence that no one would ever check. Renee stared at Dale's darkened screen for a long moment, then looked back down at the reservation, open on her own tablet. Her thumb moved twice across the glass. The truth surfaced without any drama at all. Seat 2A, Amara Bankole. Seat 4C, Dale Whitcomb. No duplicate booking. No system error. No last-minute upgrade. Renee drew a slow breath. Amara watched the understanding settle behind the flight attendant's eyes and waited for the simple, obvious correction that should have followed immediately. It never came. "Mr. Whitcomb," Renee began, but her voice carried something closer to apology than authority. Dale lifted one hand before she could finish. "I chose this seat months ago." "The aircraft changed last night," Renee said. "Your current assignment is 4C. Dale looked toward row 4 like she'd suggested he ride in the cargo hold. "That's an aisle seat." "Yes, sir. I can't work from an aisle seat." Renee nodded. Actually nodded, with real concern on her face. Something tightened hard in Amara's chest. Renee had not once said "I understand," while Amara stood there explaining, 4 separate times, that her ticket was valid. Grady Poole arrived 7 minutes later, summoned by a call from the galley. And by then the entire front cabin had gone quiet, in that specific charged way that means everyone is listening and pretending not to. He didn't ask for evidence. He didn't ask Renee what the tablet showed. He looked at Dale, settled, composed, mildly inconvenienced, and then at Amara, still standing, still holding her phone, and made his decision in about 4 seconds. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from first class. I need you to look at the actual reservation before you say another word to me," Amara said. "I've reviewed the situation. You've reviewed nothing. You walked up 30 seconds ago." Grady's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "Ma'am, I'm not going to argue with you in front of other passengers." "Then don't argue," Amara said. "Just look." He didn't. That was the part that would matter most later. In the report, in the recordings, in the sworn statement he'd eventually have to sign. He never once, in the entire encounter, opened the tablet himself. He simply repeated the instruction, louder each time, as if volume were a substitute for verification. "Take the alternate seat, or security will escort you from the aircraft." Dale, sensing the tide turning fully in his favor, allowed himself a small, satisfied exhale and reopened his laptop. That was the moment the woman across the aisle, the one who'd said nothing until now, finally spoke louder. "She has the ticket," Whitney Sorrell said again, sharper this time. "I can see it from here. Why is this even a conversation?" "Ma'am, please," Grady said, not even looking at her. Behind Amara, a teenage boy in row 5 had his phone raised, filming with the flat, careful stillness of someone who understood exactly what he was capturing. His name was Julian Ferris, 17, traveling to visit his grandmother, and he would later say the only thing that made him keep recording, through Grady's third warning, was that nobody else on that plane seemed willing to be the one who stopped it. Amara felt her pulse climbing, felt the specific, exhausting math of the moment. How many more minutes of humiliation it would take before someone with actual authority looked at the actual evidence. She had one card left to play, and she had promised herself years ago she would never play it lightly. She played it now. "Before you call security," she said, voice low and absolutely steady, "I want you to understand who you're about to have removed from this aircraft." Grady's radio was already halfway to his mouth. "Ma'am, that doesn't matter to me." "It's about to," Amara said, and dialed. The call connected on the second ring. Amara didn't put it to her ear. She put it on speaker, held it up at chest height, and let the entire front cabin hear both sides. "Amara, what's wrong?" Her father's voice, calm, immediate. The same voice he used in board meetings that decided the fate of companies worth more than the airline currently threatening to throw his daughter off a plane. "Dad, I'm on flight 714. They're trying to remove me from my seat and give it to a man who's sitting in it illegally. I need you to hear this." A brief pause, then quieter, steelier. "Put me on with whoever's in charge." Grady's radio hand had gone still. "Ma'am, I don't have time for—" "You have exactly as much time as it takes him to ask 3 questions, Amara said. "After that, it's out of my hands." She held the phone toward him. Solomon Bankole did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. 28 years of building a fund from nothing had taught him that the quietest voice in the room usually belonged to the person who could end it. "Is my daughter's boarding pass valid for seat 2A? Silence. "Is it valid, yes or no?" Renee answered before Grady could. "Yes, sir, it's valid. Does the other passenger have a current boarding pass for that seat?" "No, sir. His current seat is 4C. Has my daughter threatened anyone? Raised her voice, violated any safety instruction?" "No, sir." "Then I'd like to know," Solomon said, "why a paying customer with a confirmed seat is being threatened with removal, while the man occupying a seat that isn't his gets to sit there typing on his laptop." Dale's hand had gone still on his keyboard. He knew the name Bankole. Everyone in finance did. But it had never once occurred to him, in 11 full minutes of condescension, that the woman standing in the aisle might be the daughter of the man whose fund had quietly backed 4 different companies Dale's own firm did business with. "My name is Solomon Bankole," her father said. "Amara is my daughter, but that isn't why her ticket is valid. It was valid before you knew who I was. It'll still be valid after this call ends." Dale rose halfway out of his seat, laptop nearly sliding off the tray table, his earlier contempt replaced instantly by something close to panic. "Mr. Bankole, if I had known who she was, I would have." "You've just told on yourself," Solomon said, cutting through him without raising his voice a single decibel. "You've just told an entire aircraft that respect, in your mind, depends on knowing the right licens's name." Dale's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Amara stepped closer to Grady, phone still held up, her father's voice filling the front cabin. "My father's name doesn't change what happened here," she said. "It just makes you afraid of the consequences. The wrong was already done before this call. It doesn't need my father to be true. It only needed someone with power in this cabin to bother checking." Grady looked away first. Another chime sounded, this one from Renee's tablet. A priority alert, direct from Meridian's operations center, copied straight from an email. Solomon had fired off to 3 executives the instant he'd hung up his end of a separate call, 30 seconds earlier, that no one on the plane had heard. "Hold flight 714 at gate. Do not remove passenger. Bankole preserved all video, crew communications, and seating records. Full review required before departure." The aircraft door, which had already begun to swing shut, was pulled back open. For the first time all morning, the people who had spent 11 minutes demanding Amara prove she belonged were about to be asked to prove why they'd decided, so quickly and so confidently, that she didn't. Captain Okafor stepped out of the cockpit. 11 minutes later, once Flight 714 was already 40 minutes behind schedule. 58 years old, silver at the temples, 29 years flying commercial, and known throughout the airline for one specific habit that had occasionally annoyed impatient executives. He never made a decision until he'd seen the actual evidence. He didn't walk in with an apology already loaded. He walked in with a simple instruction: "Nobody moves until I've reviewed the record." Officer Marcus DeLeon, who'd boarded to assist with what dispatch had described only as a passenger dispute, handed the captain his notes. Amara showed her boarding pass. Dale was told, instructed, not asked, to open the live app, not the screenshot he'd already tried to pass off once. Captain Okafor compared both reservations side by side, requested the full seat history from operations. It came back within 4 minutes. Amara Bankole had purchased a first-class window seat 4 weeks earlier. The aircraft swap the night before had placed her confirmed reservation in 2A. Dale Whitcomb had originally held that same seat, but his updated boarding pass, issued, time-stamped, and acknowledged by his own hand at 9:41 the previous night, assigned him to 4C. There had never been 2 valid tickets for that seat. There had only ever been one man who decided the rule didn't apply to him. Julian handed his unedited footage over without being asked twice. Captain Okafor watched all 11 minutes of it on his own tablet, standing in the aisle while the entire front cabin watched him watch it. Dale refusing to check his own boarding pass. Renee checking Amara's identity 4 separate times while never once asking Dale for his. Grady labeling Amara uncooperative without opening a single screen. Dale, at minute 6, asking flatly whether she looked like the kind of person who normally sat up here. Whitney gave a short, clipped statement. She described Amara's tone, steady the entire time, and Dale's, which had not been. She described every warning in the cabin being aimed at the one person holding proof. Officer DeLeon confirmed there had been no threat, no physical contact, no actual safety violation of any kind, at any point. Captain Okafor turned to Renee. At what point did you know seat 2A belonged to Ms. Bankole? Renee's eyes dropped to the floor. Before Mr. Whitcomb even arrived, sir. Then why was the passenger, holding the valid reservation, the one asked to move? I was trying to find the easiest solution, Renee said, barely audible. From row 3, Whitney asked the question that would end up quoted in the news coverage more than any other line from that entire morning. Easiest for whom? Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The easiest solution had protected Dale's comfort, spared Renee a complaint from a familiar high-status flyer, and placed the entire cost, every ounce of it, onto the one woman with nothing to gain from any of it but her own assigned seat. Captain Okafor turned to Dale. Mr. Whitcomb, your confirmed seat is 4C. I need you to move there now. Dale stared at him like the instruction itself was an act of violence. After this entire spectacle, you expect me to just walk back through this cabin like I did something wrong? You occupied a seat that was never assigned to you, the captain said. The record is clear. Move. Dale stood but didn't move toward row 4. His face had gone a deep, blotchy red, the confidence from 20 minutes earlier curdling into something closer to panic, dressed up as outrage. I've been humiliated in front of this entire aircraft, he said, voice rising. I will file a complaint against every single person involved in this. People are going to lose their jobs over this. Renee flinched visibly. The threat had exposed exactly the pressure that had shaped every choice she'd made that morning. Captain Okafor's voice stayed level, unmoved. This is a direct and lawful instruction, Mr. Whitcomb, based on your current boarding pass. Move to seat 4C. Dale refused a second time. And that was the moment the phrase Grady had used 20 minutes earlier, non-compliant passenger, finally landed on the person it had actually described the entire time. Sir, Officer DeLeon said, stepping forward, you're going to need to leave this aircraft and resolve the matter at the gate. Dale spun toward Amara, his anger reshaping itself instantly into accusation, as if she were the one who'd manufactured every consequence he'd spent the last hour earning for himself. You're destroying a man's entire career over one seat. Amara held his gaze without flinching. Your career was never in that seat, Mr. Whitcomb. Your judgment put it at risk. All by itself. Nobody else did that for you. Officer DeLeon walked him to the door. No struggle. No applause. No cheering section. Just 180 passengers quietly moving their legs aside to let him pass. And a silence heavier than anything that had come before it. Captain Okafor then informed Renee and Grady that both were being removed from Flight 7 pending a full review. They'd be given the chance to submit statements and respond to the evidence, same as anyone. A replacement crew was already en route. Nobody was fired in the aisle that morning. But nobody who'd been paying attention believed for a second that either of them would be flying this route again. When the cabin finally cleared, Amara returned to 2A, set her laptop back on the tray table, pressed one hand flat against the window and breathed, slow and deliberate, for the first time in nearly an hour. She didn't smile. The seat had been returned to her, but what that cabin had witnessed was so much larger than a seat number. It was a live demonstration of how quickly status could be mistaken for truth, how calm could be mislabeled as defiance, and exactly how much proof a black woman had to produce, over and over, before anyone in a position of authority accepted what had been obvious from the very first sentence. Flight 714 left Atlanta an hour and 12 minutes late. By the time the plane leveled off above the clouds, Amara had stopped watching the empty space where Dale had been sitting. She opened her laptop, but the presentation in front of her had lost its shape completely. The words were still there, the charts still accurate, but her body hadn't caught up yet with how quiet the cabin had suddenly gone. Across the aisle, Whitney gave her a small nod and went back to her journal. No forced comfort, no unwanted questions, just quiet respect, which Amara found she needed far more than sympathy. Julian sent his original, unedited footage to Amara, to Officer DeLeon, and to Meridian's internal investigations team before he posted a single frame of it anywhere else. He blurred out other passengers' screens. He cut nothing that changed the order of events. His public clip, once he finally posted it that evening, ran just under 4 minutes. It showed Amara's ticket being verified, and re-verified, and verified again. It showed Dale's refusal to open the live app. It showed Grady's warning, word for word, and it showed the exact second Dale's tone shifted after hearing the name Amara Bankole spoken out loud in a first-class cabin at 31,000 feet. The video had 11 million views before Flight 714 landed in San Francisco. The most repeated comment underneath it wasn't celebrating Dale's removal. It was a single, harder question, asked 1,000 different ways by 1,000 different strangers. Why did her ticket only become believable once her father's name was recognized? Sterling and Vance Capital Group, the firm Dale worked for, issued a statement that same afternoon. Dale was placed on immediate administrative leave and pulled from the $210 million Meridian financing deal he'd flown to San Francisco to close. The firm also announced it was reopening 2 older, previously dismissed complaints. One from a junior associate, one from a conference hotel dispute 2 years prior, that had both been quietly filed away as personality conflicts. Dale sent Amara a formal apology through his attorney the following morning. It opened with regret over the damage to his own career and reputation. It went on for 3 paragraphs about how he'd never intended for a simple disagreement to become public in this way. His concerns, start to finish, remained centered entirely on what had happened to him. Amara read it once, closed it, didn't reply personally. Her attorney sent back 3 questions instead, on her behalf, entered formally into the record. Why did you refuse to look at her ticket? Why did you believe your word carried more weight than her evidence? Why did your respect for her only appear once you recognized her father's name? Dale never answered any of the 3. His silence became its own kind of answer. Meridian Airways suspended Renee and Grady during the investigation. Renee eventually admitted, in her sworn statement, that she had feared a complaint from a longtime premium customer and had believed, correctly, as it turned out, that Amara would be easier to pressure into moving. Grady acknowledged using the phrase non-compliant passenger, despite never having identified a single actual safety violation at any point from either passenger. The preliminary internal report was blunt in a way corporate reports rarely are. Both employees, it stated, had applied unequal verification standards, had failed to check both parties evenly, had misused crew authority to pressure the passenger less likely to complain, and had provided airport security with an incomplete account of events designed to produce compliance rather than clarity. Solomon could have ended his firm's entire financing relationship with Meridian that same afternoon. Instead, he put the deal on hold for 60 days and attached 4 conditions to its return: an independent outside review of the incident, full public release of the findings, a rewritten seat reassignment policy, and mandatory bias training tied specifically to documented real incidents, not generic slideshows nobody remembered a week later. Amara added a 5th condition, entirely her own. Meridian could never use her name, her image, or any part of this incident in a single advertising campaign, ever, for any reason. The airline had already promised every passenger equal respect on a banner she'd walked past that same morning. She wasn't going to let them turn their failure into a marketing win before they'd actually proven, with time and behavior, that anything had genuinely changed. That evening, Solomon called her from his office in Charlotte. Do you want me to push for the harshest penalties possible? I can make that happen." Amara sat by the window of her hotel room in San Francisco, watching traffic crawl 12 floors below. She thought about Renee's fear, about Grady's pride, about Dale's refusal to see her as anything at all until her name became expensive to ignore. "I want consequences strong enough to actually change how they operate," she said. "Not revenge strong enough to just end the conversation and let everyone move on feeling like victims." Her father was quiet for a moment. "That's harder." "It's supposed to be," Amara said. 9 weeks after Flight 714 left Atlanta, Meridian Airways released the findings of its independent review, in full, exactly as promised. The report didn't call it a misunderstanding. It named 3 specific, documented failures. Employees had applied unequal verification standards based on the perceived status of each passenger. They had prioritized the comfort of a premium customer over a confirmed, paid reservation. And they had converted a legitimate, evidence-backed dispute into a security matter the moment the correct passenger refused to accept an unfair resolution. The airline announced a new company-wide policy, printed in the crew handbook, under a name that had already started circulating as a kind of shorthand among flight attendants nationwide. Verify both before moving either. Crews were now required, by written policy, to check the live, active reservations of both parties in any seat dispute before requesting anyone move. A screenshot could no longer override a live booking record. Membership tier, travel history, and personal preference could no longer be used to override a confirmed assigned seat. And any request to remove a passenger required crew to name the specific safety rule allegedly violated, the specific conduct that violated it, and the actual evidence supporting that claim, in writing, before security was ever contacted. Amara read the full report alone in her office after everyone else had already left for the evening. She felt no rush of vindication reading it. Policies were promises, institutions made on paper. Their real value only ever showed up the moment someone had to choose between following the policy and pleasing whoever in the room had more visible status. Her presentation in San Francisco had gone forward, as scheduled, the very morning she landed. An hour and 12 minutes late, running on less than 90 minutes of sleep from the flight, wearing the same wrinkled blazer she'd changed in an airport bathroom stall to try to smooth out. She hadn't opened with her father's name. She hadn't opened with the video, which by then had crossed 15 million views. She'd opened with a single slide, a photograph of her own boarding pass. "The ticket already carries everything it needs to," she'd told the room. "My name, my payment, my assigned seat. What it can't carry is protection from someone else's assumptions." Then she'd demonstrated Hallowave live, start to finish. The system had recorded every gate change accurately, preserved every timestamp, delivered the same critical information to thousands of travelers simultaneously, without ever once deciding whose attention mattered more than anyone else's. Data can tell us what's true, she told the investors. People still get to decide whether that truth gets respected. Skyline Capital funded Hallowave 3 weeks later, after a technical review that focused entirely on reliability, accessibility infrastructure, and successful pilot results from 2 regional airports. The viral incident wasn't listed anywhere in their internal investment memo as a factor. Amara kept a copy of that memo. It meant more to her than every headline the story had generated combined. Renee wrote to her several weeks after that, a real letter, handwritten, not sent through any attorney. She didn't ask Amara to help save her job. She admitted, plainly, that she'd told herself she was keeping the peace, because that phrase sounded so much better than the truth underneath it. She'd pressured the passenger she judged least likely to create professional consequences for her. She'd confused Dale's confidence with credibility, and Amara's calm, steady insistence with disruption. Amara wrote back 2 sentences, nothing more. The letter matters less than what you do. The next time the passenger in front of you doesn't have a famous last name attached to them, let that person get the fairness I had to fight this hard for. Meridian invited Julian to speak at an internal training session for gate and cabin crews on the specific difference between capturing footage and actually accepting responsibility for what that footage revealed. Officer DeLeon received a formal citation for requiring documented evidence before exercising his authority, a small, quiet acknowledgement of something that should never have needed a citation to begin with. Months later, Amara boarded another Meridian flight, this time to New York. A few rows ahead of her, an older man in a tailored suit had taken the window seat clearly assigned to a young black woman traveling with a toddler. The woman held her phone out, boarding pass glowing on the screen, while the man explained, unbothered, that he'd always preferred that side of the cabin. A flight attendant approached, asked both passengers, calmly and without hesitation, for their current boarding passes, checked them side by side, right there in the aisle, in under 30 seconds. Your current reservation decides the seat, the attendant said, voice pleasant but final. Status doesn't. The man gathered his jacket without another word and moved to his assigned row. No raised voices, no security call, no powerful surname required to break the tie. Amara settled into her own window seat and watched the ground crew moving beneath the wing outside. That quiet, unremarkable correction, 30 seconds, no drama, no audience, meant more to her than the report, the headlines, or the canceled contract combined. She had never once deserved respect because she was Solomon Bankole's daughter. She had never deserved it because she'd built a company worth 9 figures, either. Her ticket had been more than enough to establish her seat. Her humanity had been enough, long before that ticket ever existed. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it reminded you of a moment you've lived through, watched happen to someone else, or hope you'd have the courage to speak up against, let us know where you're watching from, and stay close for more stories about dignity, accountability, and the quiet, ordinary courage it takes to simply tell the truth out loud.